There's one other matter that's come up, Dave. We were told that you took a trip to Texas shortly after the assassination on Friday.
Yeah, now that's true. I drove to Houston.
What was so appealing about Houston?
I hadn't been there ice skating in many years, and I was with a couple of young friends, and we decided we wanted to go ice skating.
Dave, may I ask why the urge to go ice skating in Texas happened to strike you during one of the most violent thunderstorms in recent memory?
Spur of the moment thing. Storm wasn't that bad.
I see. And where did you drive?
We went to Houston, and Saturday night drove to Galveston, stayed over there.
And then Sunday?
In the morning, we went goose hunting.
You bag any geese on this trip?
I believe the boys got a couple.
But the boys told us they didn't get any.
Come to think of it, they're right. We got out there where the geese were, and there were thousands of them all over the place. But you couldn't approach them. Well, why is a bunch of birds?
Your young friends also told us you had no weapons in the car, Dave. Isn't it a bit difficult to hunt for geese without a shotgun?
Oh. Yes, I remember now. I'm sorry, Mr. Garrison. I got confused. We got out near the geese, and only then did we realize we had forgotten our shotguns. Stupid, right? So, of course, we didn't get any geese.
I see, Dave. Well, thank you for your time. I'm sorry that this has to end inconveniently for you, but I'm going to have to detain you for further questioning by the FBI.
Why? What's wrong?
Dave, I find your story simply not believable.
Really? What part?
I welcome this kind of examination.
I am paying for this microphone.
What difference does it make?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
I'm just a patsy.
Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war.
Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
The United States is owned by foreign corporations. Do you really care? And if anybody cares, they're considered crazy.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Man, all the humanity and all
the controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
An unspeakable tragedy. Dead on arrival.
And I will go to my grave being at peace about it.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is S.T. Patrick, and you're listening to the lone gunman himself, Rob Clark, here on the Midnight Rider News Show. Take it away, Rob.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. This is Rob Clark, your friendly neighborhood host, tracing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we'll be taking a closer look at one of New Orleans' biggest suspects, and someone that Jim Garrison was very interested in, and that person is David Ferrie. And I'm not talking about the romanticized version of David Ferrie. I am talking about the real David Ferrie, which is a much different version of a person that you're all used to. Most people, when they hear the name David Ferrie, they associate it with this guy, you know, from that JFK movie by Oliver Stone. Have a listen.
Jack was a pimp. He was a bagman for the Dallas mob. He used to run guns to Castro when he was still on our side. We almost had Castro with us, then we tried to whack him. Everybody's flipping sides all the time. It's fun and games, man, fun and games.
What about the mob, Dave? How do they take in this?
The agency, too, man. CIA and the Mafia working together. Trying to whack out the beard, mutual interest. They've been doing it for years. There's more of this than you could dream. Well, check out something called Mongoose, Operation Mongoose. Government, Pentagon stuff. They're in charge. But who the fuck pulls whose chain? Who the fuck knows? Oh, what a deadly web we weave when we practice to deceive.
Then who killed the president?
Oh, man, why don't you fucking stop it? Shit! This is too fucking big for you. You know that? This is who did the president? Who killed Kennedy? Fuck, man. It's a mystery. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. The fucking shooters don't even know. Don't you get it? Fuck, man. I can't keep talking like this. They're gonna fucking kill me. I'm gonna fucking die.
So, David Ferrie, okay? You know, this guy, very, very interesting life, of this guy. And there was a very good reason that Jim Garrison was interested in him. And we'll get into all that. I promise you. But first, let's do a little cleaning of the castle, as my old buddy ST likes to say. First off, this is my fourth and final installment this year, doing a guest spot for the Midnight Rider News Show. And I couldn't be more privileged and honored that they chose me to do it. And I appreciate the opportunity. And hopefully, ST will have me back next year to do the same. And hopefully, all you out there in listener land are digging it. And if you do, I also have a very extensive archive. All you need to do, anywhere you listen to the Midnight Rider News Show, okay? All you have to do is search for the Lone Gunman Podcast. And you'll find it. There, as of right now, there are 148 shows that I've recorded there, all having to do with the Kennedy assassination. So if that's your thing, if that's what interests you, if you're interested in real, factual, evidence-based, document-based, speculative research, then please feel free to check out the archives at Spreaker.com/The Lone Gunman Podcast. That's where you can find all my stuff. Some of it's on YouTube. It's on iTunes. It's on Stitcher, etc., etc. So anywhere you listen to this show, you can find mine. So if you like what you're hearing, check it out. Let ST know you want to hear more of me in the new year. So far this year, I've brought you the stories of Guy Bannister, Larry Crayford, General Edwin Walker, and tonight, rounding up the year, we go back to New Orleans, people. We're going to be digging into David Ferrie. Not the romanticized version of David Ferrie, but the real David Ferrie. What you heard a little bit ago was the Hollywood version of David Ferrie. Okay, the Joe Pesci version of David Ferrie. This is actually what David Ferrie sounded like. And it's a long sound bite. I'm just going to play you just a little bit of it so that you can hear what David Ferrie actually sounded like, because it's very, very different. Check it out.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anytime you say. All right, on the evening of Saturday, August the 5th, 1961, one Alexander Landry Jr. of 5221 Art Street, small aeronautical group which I commanded, appeared at my home in the presence of two witnesses, namely one Leo Bevan and one Leighton P. Martins. He told of his increasing and real difficulties with his parents, primarily his mother. These family problems have arisen from the obvious psychological pattern of the mother.
Now, what do you think about that? That is a very, very different contrast to the David Ferrie that we all think we know. You know, I don't know exactly how much research went into the real David Ferrie when Joe Pesci was coming up with this character. Of course, his version is, you know, a little more interesting, I guess you would say. A little more flamboyant, a little more outlandish. You know, but Jim Garrison was a consultant on this movie. He was still alive when this movie was being made. he knew and had talked to the real David Ferrie. And he knew that the Joe Pesci version, had he been showed it, hopefully he would have been, was nowhere near the real David Ferrie. Now, David Ferrie first came on Jim Garrison's radar the weekend after the assassination, within 3 days. Jack S. Martin was tipped off the FBI. And they came and questioned David Ferrie about his involvement in the Kennedy assassination. His story was that he had been in court with Carlos Marcello the morning and most of the day on November 22nd, 1963. This cannot be corroborated by any witness. He then tells a story of him and two buddies, Melvin Coffey and Alvin Boboff, going to Texas on a little weekend getaway excursion to a skating rink in Houston. And as highly illogical as this story seems, it did have its evolutions throughout the years. They wanted to get away. They wanted to go ice skating. Ferrie was interested in opening an ice rink in Louisiana, and he wanted to go talk to the owner there to see what all it entailed. To it being a hunting trip, to them not bringing guns and not going hunting, to them bringing guns and actually going hunting. Their trip led them through Galveston, and apparently the FBI went so far as to investigate the motel logbooks where they had stayed, and there was various entries in there for the night of the 22nd, 23rd, 24th. Interestingly enough, the vehicle they were riding in was a 1961 Ford station wagon. Yeah, Comet station wagon. And it looked a whole lot like a Nash Rambler. And if you've been interested in the Kennedy assassination at all, you know the whole story, the whole, Roger Craig story of Lee Oswald running down beside the Texas School Book Depository and getting in a Nash Rambler, allegedly. But supposedly, and I say supposedly because none of this can be corroborated, Dave had actually went to Texas to fly out part of the assassination team, either to Texas or into Mexico. But things went a little haywire when Oswald ended up getting arrested. So, yeah. But again, it's all speculative at this point. David Ferrie died in 1966 or 1967, just as Jim Garrison was ramping up his investigation into the murder of President Kennedy. Now, along with his odd appearance, David Ferrie was stricken with a form of alopecia in the 30s that left him hairless over his whole body. He used to wear normal-looking toupees and everything, and then something happened where he just really didn't give too much of a damn about his appearance anymore, and he had these hideous hair pieces that he just glued to his head, and his eyebrows looked like pieces of carpeting. Just very, very strange-looking fellow. But that didn't stop him. No, it didn't stop him. He actually got along quite well. And recently, one of the declassified files was a 478 5-page file on David Ferrie. And it contains some very interesting things when we want to actually try to figure out what kind of guy this was. And yeah, I went through every page, every file for you, the listener. And when I got done, I felt so dirty. I think I needed to go take a shower. And I've never felt that way after investigating a character, allegedly involved in the Kennedy assassination. This is one of the slimiest, raunchiest, dirtiest, most disgusting human beings to ever live on this planet. And I'm not saying that lightly. I know we all have the version from, of course, the movie JFK. We have the much romanticized, probably mostly fictional version of David Ferrie, told to us by Judy Baker in her book, David Ferrie, Mafia Pilot, where she alleges that she knew and interacted and was friends with David Ferrie for a period of a few months in 1963. Again, no corroborative evidence to that whatsoever. But what you're going to see here today is that scenario is highly unlikely. Okay? Judy seems like a nice, very sweet lady. And back in 1963, she would have been a young, naive, very sweet girl. And the David Ferrie that I know after reading all of these files wasn't a very nice fellow. Okay? And very much different from the way he is portrayed by her. So, let's get into some of the things and interesting points that I found in these files. Because, thankfully, a lot of what we know about David Ferrie came from an investigations by Eastern Airlines, his former employer, when it came to an incident that allegedly happened between David Ferrie and an underage boy, and then his ultimate termination of employment from Eastern Airlines because of said incident. But they did a very thorough investigation on David Ferrie. And he was actually investigated in 1959 and 1960. He was under surveillance by U.S. Customs. So, let's get into some of the more interesting things about David Ferrie, and just hold on to your seats, folks. And I apologize if this is not your thing, if bad language offends you in any way. I apologize, and ST, I'm sorry to put this dirty business out on the airwaves, but this is reality, folks. You want to know the real David Ferrie? Then you got to know the real truth about David Ferrie in all its ugliness. And only then can we determine his possible involvement in the Kennedy assassination. Our first bit of evidence here. It's not a new document. It's been around for a while, but it needs to be reiterated because it's not out there very much. And in this file, one of the first things you run across is the Dear Bastard letter that David Ferrie wrote. And I'll give you just a little bit of it. Dear Bastard, got your letter from December 30th. Did you get my Christmas letter and the letter with the airplane pictures? You did not say, so I was not sure whether you got them or not. One of my flight students loaned me some sex movies for one night. It was 2 reels of 8mm film with some dude effing this broad. He got his nuts jerking under her knee. She blew him. He effed her in the A twice and in the P twice. Hope I can get them back when you get back, so you can see them too. Jimmy was over when I showed them. ejaculate flew that night. I could have raped an exhaust pipe. They made me so hot. That Cloud 9 you sent was tops. What is it? Can you send more? If you have to pay for it, let me know and I'll send the dough. Bring plenty when you get back. Have you ever tried pills? There's a bunch of different ones. Some make you get on Cloud 9, bro. Send me some if you can, except more than last time. The weather conditions at its shittiest. I am losing money like a mother effer. I hope this S stops soon. Sorry, it's hard to read these type letters. Still no business for the beach to speak of. I'm worried somewhat. We have to ask $110 an hour for it to make a profit. Some other guy, a big politician, came by and started talking to me today about flying an Aztec with all the goodies, double L's, 3 light marker beacon, ADF, and DME, whatever all that is. He claims that he has the business to keep it going. I hope he's right. When do you hit the States? What date? What date do you hit New Orleans? When are we going to get bombed? Etc., etc. Write, you bitch, and give me the word. So, that is the Dear Bastard letter. That is a small window into the real David Ferrie. Clearly not just a homosexual. Okay? That might have been his personal proclivity, maybe his top proclivity, but it appears that he enjoyed watching women have sex with men. He possibly enjoyed having sex with women, as we will find out later on in more of these documents. I think he was more classified what we would call today bisexual or trisexual. He'd try anything. Also mention of the Cloud 9, which is basically code for, uppers. I don't know exactly what it's referring to here. Poppers, uppers, I don't know. They were very big back in the gay community in the 60s and 70s, where they would pop these things open, inhale it, and get sent up to Cloud 9 for a little while. I think that's might be what he's referring to, since he refers to say, hey, have you ever heard of pills? Huh? No, I've never heard of those before. But apparently, old Dave loved raunchy sex and getting bombed with his buddies. So yeah, there's a small window into the real David Ferrie. Also interesting, I found that as part of the Eastern Airlines investigation, they investigated several things about David Ferrie, including a section called Personal-Reputation. And the answer comes as this. Your inquiry shows the applicant to be single, referring to David Ferrie. However, we have file information from Tampa, Florida, dated January 11th, 1949, which shows that he was married at that time and had 2 dependents. Persons contacted in this city, however, were unable to confirm this. He makes his home with his parents in a good middle-class section of the city. Home surroundings are favorable, and no criticism was found in the residence in respect to morals, habits, honesty, or associates. It is obvious that his neighbors are not familiar with his private life. He has a favorable financial and credit standing, and we found no indication of speculation of gambling. So, and they went on to check his police record, his health habits, his education, military. Says you believe to be a member of the Air Corps Reserve. However, we are unable to learn whether he is active or inactive. Note, in view of the foregoing information, which has been verified time and again over the past few years, we certainly cannot recommend him as a desirable employment risk. You think? So, one of the things in the JFK movie that's Hollywoodized, I would say, is the interaction between Jim Garrison and David Ferrie, which did not happen in real life. When David Ferrie was being uber paranoid towards the end of his life and he wanted to get things off his chest, he contacted Lou Ivon, who worked in district attorney's office, and Garrison had Lou put Dave up in the Fontainebleau Hotel. Now, in that scene that I played you at the beginning of the show, it didn't happen, at least not the way it did in the movie. Jim Garrison wasn't there, okay, in real life, just Lou Ivon. So that's pretty much all we have to go on is his notes from that night. He didn't record anything. He didn't press David Ferrie on things because he didn't know that David Ferrie would leave the hotel and be dead, 2 days later. So it's unfortunate that he didn't press him more on certain things. But when he was questioning him in the hotel towards the end of his life, okay, he's talking about that weekend getaway to Texas. And at one point, Lou Ivon asked him point blank, Dave, who shot the president? And he said, well, that's an interesting question, and I've got my own thoughts about it. Ferrie then sent his friend into another room to get an anatomy book and a pathology book, and he pulled out a sheet of paper and began to sketch on it. Ferrie drew a sketch of the Texas School Book Depository and of the parade route and of the area in general from memory. Ferrie said that before he would definitely draw a conclusion, he would have to have more information and facts. And I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is not the hotel interaction. This happened earlier, probably several months before he died. This was actually at his house. So, yeah, okay. Ferrie said that before he could definitely draw a conclusion, he would have to have more information. Ferrie then went into a long spiel about the trajectory of bullets in relation to height and distance. He said that different guns and shells have different trajectories and that bullets tend to drop as they are shot. Ferrie said the Warren Commission did not have enough pertinent scientific information to come to an objective conclusion. He said he did not read the Warren report, but what he had read proved to him that the commission did not know what they were doing. Ferrie went into a long spiel about JFK's neck wound. In the course of his lecture on anatomy and pathology, he named every bone in the human body and every hard and soft muscle area. He talked extensively about the dermis and the epidermis. Ferrie said if the same bullet that struck JFK in the back or neck eventually struck Connally, that Connally or Kennedy had to be a contortionist. He then rattled off some more scientific information in regard to bones and skin and how a bullet decreases in speed when it strikes an object and how the same bullet could not have possibly caused all that damage. Sound familiar? Ferrie said that question would never be answered because the doctor who performed the tracheotomy had 10 thumbs and left unanswered the most important question of all time. Was the tracheotomy an exit or entry wound? Ferrie then laughed and said the doctors are almost as stupid as lawyers, but the lawyers are worse because they are always in your pocket. I then said, in other words, Dave, you don't buy the one-shot theory? Ferrie said he wasn't saying anything because he didn't want J. Edgar on his tail, that he had enough with Garrison to contend with. Ferrie said that in time he would work the whole thing out, and then laughingly said that he would contact our office. I noticed at this point that he was in a very good spirits and laughing and joking, and even commented that he's feeling pretty good now, and that he had 3 cups of coffee already and hadn't thrown up yet. So, despite not really allegedly knowing too much about the Kennedy assassination, it's interesting that he had been doing a little research on it. To draw a map of the school book depository and the parade route and all this and that, worry about the trajectories of the bullets. And he's almost handing Garrison the magic bullet theory at this point stating that one bullet couldn't possibly have caused all of these wounds in the president and the governor. At this point in the conversation, Ferry then received another phone call, this time from a Steve Littleton and his wife, and joked with Littleton's wife about how he knew that she had dated Lee Harvey Oswald, and that he was going to tell Garrison on her. She must have told him that she had seen his picture in the paper, and he replied that he didn't like it because it made him look unphotogenic. She also must have asked Ferry if it was him that some people identified with somebody or at some place, and he said that the people are mistaken, or he had a common face, which we all know isn't true. After he hung up the phone, we told him we had to leave. Ferry said he had more to tell us about the one-shot theory. We told him to save it for another day, as it was dark already and we had to meet Garrison. I then asked him if he would like to tell me more about his trip to Hammond, and he smiled and said, "Go to hell." I then asked if he stayed with Clay Shaw. He said, "Who's Clay Shaw?" I said, "All right, if that doesn't ring a bell, how about Clay Bertrand?" He said, "Who's Clay Bertrand?" I said, Clay Bertrand and Clay Shaw are the same person. He said, "Who's that?" "Who said that?" I said, "Dean Andrews told us." He said, "Dean Andrews might tell you guys anything. You know how Dean Andrews is." Ferry then started to go into another lecture, and we told him we had to go. He followed us down the stairs and walked out to the sidewalk with us. Ferry asked Ivan to be sure and call him. Ivan assured him he would, and we left. So, yeah. It's very interesting. So there could be the genesis of the Garrison's one-shot theory that was so elegantly put forth in the JFK movie. That is actually another thing that kind of actually didn't take place in real life. Because Garrison was hardly ever in court. He had his team do most of the work. But, anyway, we push on. Now, after David Ferry was found dead in his apartment, the investigators showed up. Says the place was being renovated. The living room was heavy with the smell of stale cigarettes. Every ashtray was heaped and overloaded and overflowing with cigarette butts. Furniture, greasy from sweat and dirt, rested on a littered, threadbare carpet. An American flag stood in one corner. Next to it was a typewriter in a case. Dr. Nicholas Chetta, Orleans Parish Coroner, said tests showed that the suicide note, allegedly, found in the apartment was typed on that typewriter. It is my theory that Ferry had just about decided on suicide at the time he called me Friday. He may have had the note written. When I talked to him, especially on the phone, it seems to me in retrospect that Ferry just wanted to clear himself, then cash in. But by the time we had finished our conversation, he had perked up a little. He said he would like to file a suit that would allow him to subpoena Garrison and expose the harassment he was going through. I encouraged him because I thought it would be a good story if he did file a suit. By the time I left his apartment, he was saying that he would prepare a suit over the weekend to file Monday. He called Sunday to say he planned to get together with an attorney on the suit. He said he was feeling better and sounded better. By Monday, he was working in an attorney's office trying to get the suit together. The target of the suit was vague, but one of those sued would apparently be Jack Martin, a nut and self-styled private detective who, he said, had supplied Garrison a list of names both in 1963 and last year to check out in connection with the assassination. Ferry's name was at the top of both lists. By this time, Ferry was reading every scrap on the Garrison probe and taking almost a happy-go-lucky attitude toward the investigation. It is well known in New Orleans that there is a rift between the FBI office and the DA's office. Ferry had been down to the FBI office Monday, he had said, and to talk to the agents. One of the agents told him, "I know where you were the day Kennedy was assassinated. You were cooling your heels with me in federal district court." This is mentioned in an earlier file. Ferry said the FBI boys were chuckling about the Garrison investigation. Now, this little piece here that I'm reading from, it was written by the last journalist to interview David Ferry before he died. And this alleged FBI file it's never surfaced, where it says that he was in court on November 22nd, 1963 with them. Ferry asked me if I could find out exactly when Oswald was in New Orleans. He said he needed the information for his suit. I looked up the dates in a condensation of the Warren report and gave it to him. He said he was having trouble getting the suit together, but it was apparently occupying most of his day. He talked to my wife on Tuesday. He had a new theory on the trajectory of bullets that entered Kennedy's body. He wanted to take me to a toxicology lab to show me what he was talking about with a cadaver. He also complained of headaches. By now, he had stopped asking me if I thought he would be arrested. He had become almost like a spectator as far as the Garrison investigation was concerned. He oozed good-natured confidence. I talked to him Tuesday evening, and he had been watching a TV news show with interest. He was in a good mood, and by Wednesday, he was dead. The change in attitude over the space of almost a week leads me to believe that he was at low ebb when he called, but had decided to live and fight back after all. For this reason, natural death immediately made more sense than suicide. He left a long note, only 2 paragraphs of which had been made public. It has been described as philosophical in nature. The center of things in Ferry's apartment was a coffee table placed in front of the couch. It held an overloaded ashtray and a cluster of bottles containing pills and liquid medicine. The DA's office said 15 bottles of medicine were found in the apartment. I would say there were at least that many on the table alone. On Friday, at least, it was the room of a man who had given up. Ferry either propped himself against the arm of the sofa or reclined full length against 2 soiled pillows as he related the details of troubles that had reduced him from a man of means to a man of poverty. So, and as you'll see as we go through these documents, that for different people, Ferry has different stories, and his stories evolve, they change, details change, people change. It's very interesting to see the shift, and it'd be great, if I was such an organized person that I could take you chronologically through all this, like a great orator would, but I'm kind of jumping around a little bit and just hitting the high points. If anybody would like to look into the real David Ferry more, I highly suggest you check out the newly declassified documents and the David Ferry file contained therein. Next up is a memorandum to Jim Garrison from investigator Lynn Loisel concerning a telephone conversation from January 19, 1967 with Agent Number 1. Agent Number 1 called Lynn Loisel and told him that Dave Ferry and he had gone to an apartment off the Veterans Highway to look at some dirty films last night. Here we go again. That this apartment was in one of Carlos Marcello's apartment houses, and the apartment was 18N, but he didn't know the exact street address. He said there were about 15 people present, and he believed that the operator of the show is a Cuban named Carlos. Agent Number 1 also stated that there were 3 colored girls whose names were Shawanda, Margaret, and Barbara present at the party. He said that Margaret has been with Dave since 1962 and that she knows plenty of his associates. So apparently, Dave was not racist, as a lot of people were back in the day. Let me move on. Shawanda and Barbara haven't been around that long, and Margaret was definitely Dave's favorite. He said that David asked him, Agent Number 1, to burglarize this clerk's house because he felt like he could make some easy money. He also said that this clerk always had $1,000 on him and he knows he must keep the money in his house. Agent Number 1 said the clerk was due at the airport Monday and Dave would get his license plate number. check it out, and find out where the clerk lives, and then they would burglarize the house with Dave acting as the lookout man and Dave going in. I think they mean agent number 1 going in. Agent number 1 also said that Ferry put money in the NBC bank yesterday. Agent number 1 said he doesn't know where Ferry gets the money from because Ferry only makes living expenses by teaching student flyers at the airport. Agent number 1 said Dave was carrying a rifle in his car and said he was going to shoot one of those kids that had burglarized his own apartment. Loisel asked him when the apartment was burglarized and what was taken, and agent number 1 said it was burglarized a few days ago and that 2 reels of dirty film, a letter, and some pictures of Dave screwing the N-word girl Margaret, and a picture of Frank Woodruff in an army camp standing naked jerking off. Later on this date, agent number 1 called me back and told me that a Cuban was out talking to Dave a few minutes ago, and he was sure that Dave called the Cuban Carlos. He said he didn't believe that this was the same Carlos who had shown the film last night. Agent number 1 also said that Dave Ferry told him that the clerk would be at the airport Saturday and that agent number 1 was to burglarize the clerk's house maybe Saturday night, but that he would go by himself and would burglarize the house when everybody was sleeping. Loisel asked agent number 1 why Dave decided he was not going to go with agent number 1, and agent number 1 said that from here on out, I am going to leave the burglaries to you. That will be your department. Agent number 1 said that he would call back tomorrow and find out what he should do about the burglary. So, here is another thing. All right, Dave Ferry surrounded himself and socialized with young men and teenage boys. A lot of them. A lot of different ones. And apparently one of his go-to things was he would figure out where people had money, figure out what a good target to burglarize would be. And he would send his boys to do the burglaries and bring the money back. This is the kind of guy David Ferry is, okay? Very interesting. But let's move on. As a little window into his life as a pilot while working at Eastern Airlines, we have this from a coworker. On the few occasions that I was a crew member on Ferry's flights, he was captain. We flew to Houston, Corpus Christi, and Brownsville with stops between New Orleans, Houston, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, New Iberia, Lake Charles, Beaumont, Port Arthur, then to Houston, Corpus Christi, Brownsville, and back the same way the same day. As a rule, the flight would have about a 30-minute hangover between stops for passenger deplaning, baggage, cargo handling, etc. During this period of time, the captain would go into the station manager's operations office and check the weather ahead, fuel requirements, etc. The last year I flew off and on as a crew member with Ferry was 1962. Ferry would never get out of the cockpit from the minute we took off from New Orleans until we returned at midnight. Ordinarily, the captain at the end of the trip would stop in operations, if for no other reason than to stow his flight bag until his next trip. Ferry never went through operations while starting the flight or ending the trip, the times that I was part of the crew. I casually asked him about this in Houston once, and he told me that his life was in danger, that the communists were out to get him. He did, in fact, appear very disturbed on every occasion. When I knew him in the beginning, he was very talkative and cheerful, but when I saw him in 1962, he was more grim and, to say the least, and totally unresponsive to his fellow pilots or crew members. I think I was the only one he really talked to, and then only because I was an attorney on the side as well. I can remember occasions in 61 and 62 when Ferry would stop by the office unexpectedly, usually on Saturday afternoons when my office building was deserted. And on these visits, he began to tell me something of his extracurricular activities, but only after inspecting my office for bugging equipment and asking me to swear that I was not taping him. These activities consisted of flying to Cuba and back with passengers, once to the Isle of Pines. He would make these trips via Tampa and one of the Keys and then on to Cuba. He also mentioned training Cuban guerrillas. Now, interestingly enough, in the book, I apologize, I tried to find the title of the book there for a minute. but my books are in storage, and I can't actually get to them right now. But there was a book, and the beginning chapter opened up with a fantastic story about David Ferrie flying into Cuba under the cover of night, landing at a homemade airstrip in the middle of the jungle, and rescuing people from Cuba amidst gunfire and actually getting nicked in the arm as he was taking back off out of Cuba to come back to the States. Did this really happen? I don't know. But, apparently, there are rumors and stories of this. There's no official documentation on it. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that he was moonlighting as a, contract pilot for the CIA and the anti-Castro Cubans to do things like this before the Bay of Pigs. Very interesting to say the least. Now, when it comes to did David Ferrie know Clay Shaw? Did Clay Shaw know David Ferrie? Well, we have a document from March 5th, 1967, to the director of Dallas and New Orleans FBI office. Reno Tel Bureau, February 25th, 1967. Number 1213S advised this date that Ora Lee, Clay Shaw's former secretary at the International Trade Mart in New Orleans, who is employed by the Heart Fund at Ochsner Clinic, stated in front of Dr. Charles B. Moore and others at Ochsner Hospital after Shaw's press conference where he advised he never met David Ferrie. She related that she had seen Ferrie go into Shaw's office in the International Trade Mart building on a number of occasions and believed Ferrie had privileged entry into Shaw's office. Okay. So, not to mention the fact that I myself have interviewed a former Minuteman, Robert Taylor, who stated that he had also seen Ferrie and Shaw together in Missouri in the early 60s at a Minuteman meeting, and they had flown in on a plane. He said that the only reason he remembers them because they were a very odd-looking couple. Tall, silver-haired fox, and this weird-looking character, David Ferrie, in his pilot jacket. They kind of stood out, But at the time, this was before the Kennedy assassination. When he saw them, of course, no big deal. Of course, after the assassination, and he realized, what Garrison was investigating, and when these guys came on the radar, he realized that he had seen these two guys together at a meeting of the Minutemen in Missouri in the early 60s. So, with all the, alleged sightings of these two together, given their proclivities and their interests, and it seems like New Orleans was such a small town back then that everybody knew everybody. At least it seems that way. So just something to think about. When we hear Clay Shaw just lie so easily, just take a listen to a piece of this. Because we know now, of course, and Garrison was vindicated, that Clay Shaw did have ties to the CIA. He was the head of the International Trade Mart. He would travel all the time to different companies, and he would be debriefed about what he saw there, and sometimes he would be told to look for things there or meet people at different places. So it was verified in the 70s that Clay Shaw was a CIA asset. But listen here in this little piece of an interview to him lie so easily.
Mr. Shaw, before the district attorney's men came here and arrested you, had you any idea that anything like this was planned, that Mr. Garrison was after you or anything like that?
None whatsoever. No idea.
What are your general feelings about the case now?
Well, you understand I am constrained by court order not to discuss the case as such. I can say to you that, as I've said before, I am completely innocent. I have no knowledge of any conspiracy whatsoever to kill President Kennedy or anyone else.
What are your personal feelings about President Kennedy? What were they when he was alive?
I admired him very much. I felt that he had brought a new vigor, a new approach to the presidency, which struck me as being one that would produce very fine and fruitful results in the years ahead. I think his death was a tragedy in the sense that what would have come from his efforts was cut off.
Mr. Garrison has talked a lot about right-wingers in this case. What are your personal political views?
Well, I think I could describe myself best probably as a Wilsonian FDR liberal. I believe very thoroughly in the progressive ideas that these two presidents put forth, and I think that Mr. Kennedy actually was a kind of lineal descendant in his approach to the problems of our country.
You have never yourself had any CIA connection?
None whatsoever.
Any association with the organization
no,
at all?
None.
Have you read the...
Yeah, you like that? He can lie so easily. So if he's lying about that so easily, what else is he lying about, people? I mean, come on. So back to Ferry and the great investigation that Eastern Airlines did into this guy. I mean, they were ruthless back then. They apparently spared no expense in investigating the hell out of David Ferry. Part of their final report, they listed other areas of information which were uncovered during the investigation not previously known to Eastern. Ferry's record with the Civil Air Patrol and his organization of an unauthorized unit. Number 2, Ferry's connection with a club for juveniles known as the Omnipotents. Number 3, Ferry's activities in New Orleans in connection with his claim to have a PhD from a Phoenix University in Milan, Italy, and to be a research psychologist. Now, of course, he claimed to have this PhD. He claimed he wanted people to call him Dr. Ferry. And in fact, this alleged college in Milan, Italy could not be substantiated. Number 4, Ferry's public claims in New Orleans to be a graduate of Phoenix University, as was said. Number 5, Ferry's involvement in 1960 in the case of runaway juvenile Al Cherami. Now, I know what everybody's thinking out there. Is this guy related to Rose Cherami? You know, from the infamous beginning of the JFK movie, where, you know, the lady is pushed out of the car and then left for dead, taken to a hospital, and then ends up dying a few days later. Stripper, allegedly had ties in New Orleans, Florida, and Dallas. Number 6, Ferry's visit to Albert Cherami while the boy was in detention under the guise of being a doctor. Number 7, Ferry's involvement in 1961 in the case of runaway juvenile Al Landry Jr. 8, Ferry's involvement with the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church and his expulsion from that organization. Number 9, Ferry's involvement with the American Medical Association, whereby he was warned to stop practicing medicine or face criminal charges. Because, shocker, his alleged PhD was bogus. Number 10, Federal Aviation Agency fine in 1960 for permitting a student pilot to solo in his aircraft with a passenger. Number 11, Ferry's speech in 1961 before the Military Order of World Wars, which speech was stopped because of Ferry's attacks upon the President of the United States at the time, John F. Kennedy. Interesting. Ferry's claimed that some Eastern employees were communists and fellow travelers. Also noted in this Section C report, refusal of Ferry to cooperate in company's investigation of above matters. On February 18, 1963, the company attempted to continue its investigation of the above matters by inquiries about them to Ferry. He refused to answer any questions on the above subjects, including questions about his explanation as to why the criminal charges had been brought against him. Now, it's very interesting if you read, because the entire, I guess you call it a hearing for the Eastern Airlines thing, it occurred in Florida. I think it was in Miami. And David took along his attorney, one Mr. G. Ray Gill, who we've all heard of before, known associate of Guy Bannister, Carlos Marcello, allegedly involved in the plans for the assassination that were sent via Thomas Beckham to Lawrence Howard in Dallas a few weeks before the assassination, which David Ferry was allegedly present in the offices of G. Ray Gill when this happened. So, there's that. We've all heard the name Sergio Arcachis Smith, the leader of a CIA-backed Cuban Revolutionary Front, who had an office in the Balter Building along with Guy Bannister, being associated and mentioned with the Kennedy assassination. Now, here's a letter to Mr. Sergio Arcachis Smith, Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front, Balter Building, New Orleans, Louisiana, August 1st, 1961. Dear Mr. Smith, the request made in your letter of July 16th to Captain Hickenbacker has been given careful consideration. Unfortunately, we will be able to give Captain Ferry a leave at this time for several reasons. In the first place, our flight crews are all badly needed at present time due to the volume of our flight operations this time of year. In addition to this fact, Eastern found it necessary several years ago to establish a policy of not granting leaves of absence with pay for any political reasons. This policy has been followed for many years, regardless of the company's sympathies for the political causes involved. I am sorry we're unable to grant Captain Ferry a leave as requested. So, that's interesting. And lend some credence to the CIA-backed Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front, led by Sergio Arcachis Smith, being tied with David Ferry, and him possibly sending Ferry into Cuba on these clandestine flights to smuggle in and out people and things. That was a letter, I guess he wrote to Eastern Airlines requesting that David Ferry be given a few months off with pay so that he could pursue these political reasons, have more time to fly into Cuba and do other various things. So, there's another tie in New Orleans, in the Balter Building, between David Ferry, Sergio Arcachis Smith, Guy Bannister. You know, I could do this all night, people. Next up, we have a letter from Sergio Arcachis Smith that he had written to Eastern Airlines. This is you heard the response. This is the original letter that he sent. As you know, the above organization is the provisional Cuban government until such time as Fidel Castro is expelled. It is on behalf of that organization that this letter of request is written. It is requested that you send to us for 2 or 3 months your captain, David W. Ferry. Let me explain this request. When the Cuban, the FRD was originally organized under the demands of the U.S. government, the FRD was the front for the efforts of the CIA to reinstate democratic government in Cuba. I mean, this is not a secret, and he pretty much says it right here in this letter. The effort of April 17th failed, the Bay of Pigs, as you know. Thereafter, the morale of the Cubans in exile and the underground within Cuba fell to zero. Then along came Captain Ferry. He strongly prodded our whole organization until it was revitalized. Thereafter, dissident elements were removed, fund collecting began, the underground was reorganized, and the re-harassment of Castro has begun. Efforts to unseat Castro have been proceeding along with the paramilitary lines outlined by President Kennedy and within the framework of the U.S. Neutrality Act. At this time, our efforts are nearing a climax. When this climax is reached, the position of Castro should become rapidly untenable thereafter. Our disruptions of certain imports have already created substantial unrest. We labor under a severe time handicap. At this time, there are 45 MiG-15 aircraft, 45 MiG-17s, and we have seen 3 MiG-19s. We are certain of 2 IRE hard installations, I guess nuclear. Numerous watercraft are held by Castro. The whole is to be aimed at the Republic of Panama in December when the U.S. is tied down in Berlin. Therefore, we must move intelligently with speed. Cubans must retake Cuba for the sake of all Americans. The reinvigorating of our progress was the result of the prodding of Captain Ferry and his associates here in New Orleans. Through him, we have been able to get the best advice in affairs political, economic, and military. Furthermore, he has helped us straighten our affairs. As a result, our organization is running smoother every day and our operations have begun. In addition, Captain Ferry has been assisting in obtaining needed equipment. Likewise, he has been assisting in the handling of refugees. Since events are approaching a climax, we sorely need his advice on a day-to-day basis. Knowing your own often demonstrated patriotism, we are requesting that Captain Ferry be given either a 60 or 90-day leave with pay so that the work at hand can be completed. At this time, he holds in his hands so many threads which pertain to the security of the Caribbean area that no reasonable substitution could be made. We hope that you will review this request with favor. Likewise, my other help or service which you may give us will be greatly appreciated. Signed, Sergio Arcacha Smith, official delegate of the Frente Revolucionario Democrático. Yeah. So, apparently, there might be something to this. With Ferry making these clandestine flights into Cuba under the guise of working for the, quote, CIA, and led by this front organization headed by Sergio Arcacha Smith. Interesting. Now, again, we return to the interesting fellow known as Jack Martin, who was the first to tip off and drop the dime to Garrison and the FBI about David Ferry and all the things that he was allegedly involved with in the Kennedy assassination. When he first dropped the dime, he made a lot of allegations, such as, that Ferry was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, that he was allegedly supposed to drive there to fly some people out at Redbird Airport, that he had known Oswald in the Civil Air Patrol, and that there was a picture out there to prove it. He also said that when Oswald was arrested, he had Ferry's library card on him. Now we have Jack Martin inserting himself into the Eastern Airlines investigation. And this is, let's see, from the 20th of July, 1963. To the Honorable William Bell, Legal Counsel, Attorney for Eastern Airlines, Miami International Airport. Dear Mr. Bell, after my telephone call and your conversation with Messenger Brown, our friend, in quotes, David W. Ferry, got wind of the storm brewing. It seems that Archbishop Marchena, who's about to be thrown to the wolves by the clergy of that church in favor of its true primate, Archbishop Cyrus Augustine Starkey, phoned this guy, Bishop Hyde, in Washington, and blew the whistle on things. Thus it was that Ferry never made the scene, as it were. It seems that Hyde, Marchena, and some other people tried to take this church, the old Roman Catholic, over, but it failed. According to the American Yearbook of Churches and other official sources, the true Archbishop Primate is Most Reverend Cyrus Augustine Starkey, 32 East 3rd Street, Morristown, New Jersey. It seems after my alert to him, he sent in his apostolic legate, a Father Mario, who's down there in Kankakee now, straightening things out, but good. The very idea holding I don't know what that word is, a synod, to kick out the true head of things? Heh. The main investigators seem to have been Ferry, who once offered Starkey $1,000 if he'd ordain him, Hyde, and this N-word Marchena. Now, grapevine has it that Bishop Hyde, who has valid Orthodox holy orders, may still try to again attempt ordination of Ferry, there where Hyde now lives in Park Road, Northwest Washington, D.C. I also have information that Hyde is under observation of the police moral squad there in Washington. Moreover, he's being watched by the Evening Star, a newspaper there. If you put the heat to Hyde with some of your bulldog ex-Fed investigators, Hyde will crack. He's weak, and he may turn over some of Ferry's old letters to you as evidence. This guy, Joseph Oster of Oster & Associates, Audubon Building here in New Orleans, has copies of letters that I once talked Hyde out of that were written by Ferry to Hyde requesting ordination. Since then, Ferry boosted the ante. The price must have been right or something. Your friend, J.S. Martin. Signed, Jack. P.S. I'll be at Starkey's house for a while after leaving here. So please, if you care to write me there, Jack Martin, care of Starkey, 32 East 3rd Street, Morristown, New Jersey. Are you any relation to William Dunstan Bell? P.S. So, yeah. Now, that was a letter to William Bell, the lead attorney for Eastern Airlines. And this is a letter to William Bell, or from William Bell to a Mr. Glenn Harlan, April 3rd, 1963. In the January 31st, 1963 report from the Southern Research Company, there is the following reference. As a result of direct contact by mail, a letter was received from Mr. Vernon McAnich, Naples, Italy. The following is quoted. According to the information available at the Consulate General, the Phoenix University no longer exists. It was formerly operated by a man by the name of Francesco d'Aragona, who also operated several other, quote, universities in Italy. The institution was not accredited and, according to the Italian authorities, conferred worthless academic titles as well as titles of honor, also of little value, for a small fee. Captain Ferry has taken the position that he is a PhD and a legitimate one. Therefore, we would appreciate your obtaining the original of this letter. So there it is, folks. Proof that David Ferry was not a legitimate PhD, despite loving being called Dr. David Ferry. Now, let's get into some associates of David Ferry. I have before me the arrest report of one Leighton Martins. The subject, Leighton Martins, and Sealing and Blackman, found in 1961 Plymouth, parked near a shopping center in Lake Visca. The car belongs to Sealing. Leighton Martins is second in command to one Arcasius Smith, who is conducting a counter-revolution movement in New Orleans against Fidel Castro of Cuba. Also connected with this organization is one Captain David Ferry, white male, 43, of 331 Atherton Drive, Metairie, Louisiana, who was driven by the three men in Sealing's car to Arcasius Smith's residence at 112 Egret, a short while before being found by the shopping centers by officers Lee and Ryan. Captain David Ferry is wanted for attempted theft of an airplane. FBI notified. This is August 30th, 1961. The arresting offense was vagrancy by loitering, pending investigation of a burglary. So, now Leighton Martins was a young 18 and 20-year-old fellow who was one of David Ferry's many roommates for a time. Interestingly enough, we have testimony from Guy Bannister, who felt compelled enough to travel to Miami, Florida to testify on Captain David W. Ferry's behalf to Eastern Airlines. What is your name, sir? Answer, Guy Bannister. Where do you reside? 7059 Argonne, New Orleans, Louisiana. What is your profession? I am an investigator and a criminologist. Have you had any special training in these fields? Yes, I have attended numerous FBI schools and other courses. I have been on the faculty of several universities. Have you ever been a member of the FBI? Yes, I was a special agent in Chicago, or in charge in Chicago. What is a special agent in charge? A special agent in charge bears a relationship to other agents as a general to his private soldiers. Are you acquainted with Captain Ferry? Yes, I am. How did you first become acquainted with Captain Ferry? I was retained first by him and then by others to investigate the criminal charges made against him. Later, I was to investigate the charges made by Eastern Airlines. Would you please enumerate the charges from whatever source that you investigated? Well, first I investigated the criminal charges. I reviewed the file of the district attorney. I found they had no case and so informed them. I found that Eric Cruchette was not a stable individual and was a type who would frighten easily under those circumstances, do anything he was told. I have spoken with him on numerous occasions. He consists of the crimes. He insists the charges of crimes occurred. How would you define moral turpitude? Answer. It is any intentional act, I repeat the word intentional, against justice, honesty, or good morals, which acts are in themselves unjust, dishonest, or immoral. Have you investigated Captain Ferry's life, background, and conduct in regard to moral turpitude? Yes, I have. What did you find? Well, Captain Ferry is not guilty of moral turpitude. You have examined Captain Ferry's reputation in the community, have you not? Yes, I have. And what did you find? I find he has the highest of reputations for his life, his philosophy, and his conduct. He has brought respect to the airline pilot profession. How does he bring respect to the profession? Such things as his learning, his abilities, and his civic interest. A lot of people think of airline pilots as harem-scarum people obsessed with sex, salary, and seniority. Captain Ferry has set the lie to this notion. Wow. Either Bannister is lying his ass off, or he is a horrible investigator. My money's on his lying his ass off. Back to our buddy, Jack Martin. Now, it seems to me that there was some kind of a love-hate relationship between Jack Martin and David Ferry. This letter is to the president of Eastern Airlines. January 18th, 1963. Dear Sir, this writer has been a private investigator for a number of years, and during that time has been acquainted with many investigative agencies, their personnel, technique, and integrity, or lack thereof it. His experience with Eastern Airlines is not so extensive. A recent experience is causing him concern and anger. I was recently contacted by an individual who represented himself to be an employee of the Southern Research Center and employee of Eastern Airlines. The contact was relative to an investigation of one Captain David W. Ferry. I have known Captain Ferry for some time and used his services in solving a thorny case for which the federal government was interested. Thus I can vouch for the man and his integrity. The individual who contacted me used threats and intimidation, all in violation of Louisiana statutes, to get me to cooperate in framing Captain Ferry. When I would not yield, blandishments were offered in the form of a bribe to assisting in hanging this man. This strikes me as detestable. When I would not cooperate with these people, I was subjected to harassment, my house placed under surveillance, neighbors contacted, and in general, my peace and quiet was disturbed. Is this the way Eastern Airlines operates? Is it part of your policy to harass the general public so that something can be framed against one of your own employees? I hardly think that a man of your integrity and position would tolerate such conduct. I read in the newspapers where 13 of your captains exposed their ships and their passengers to unnecessary hazards by having stewardesses on their laps while in flight. Their wrists were slapped and they went back to work. Contrawise, this man has worked hard and honorably for Eastern and is being subjected to a campaign to get him fired. Illegal and unethical activities are being employed. I trust that a man in your position will not permit this to continue and that Captain Ferry will be restored to flight status without further delay. Meanwhile, I am compelled to advise my associates and subordinates not to patronize Eastern Airlines until this situation is cleared up. I hope to have your early reply. Yours truly, Jack S. Martin, Sr. So, odd. Very odd. Very, very odd. Very contrasting behavior from Jack Martin. In that letter, in early 63, he was vouching for what a great guy David Ferry is, despite knowing full well to the contrary. Also, I find this interesting. 3 days before that letter, Eric Cruchette wrote a letter to the president of Eastern Airlines. Dear Sir, I am Eric Cruchette. I was supposed to have been the state witness in criminal charges in Louisiana against your Captain David Ferry. I am writing this letter for 3 main reasons. I want to exonerate Captain Ferry. Also, I want to complain about the way Eastern Airlines is treating him and the way I have been treated. I tried to exonerate him before to your Captain Grenier, but he would not give me the chance. So I'm writing you since you are the president of the company. Here's what happened. There is a certain woman here in New Orleans who has relatives who are big politicians. This woman is a real one. Believes me. I am no doctor, but I am sure something is not right with her. She has been after, in quotes, Captain Ferry for a long time. She has cooked up more stories and lies than I can count. Of course, he is not the only one. She has more on her list that she gives it to, and I am one of them. What she has got against me or Captain Ferry, I cannot figure out. She has a funny pattern. This month it is one person she doesn't like, and next month it is somebody else. She figures she is the hand of God or something, and runs around judging people and then goes after them. She brought this mess on. Her own family has trouble with her. One of her sons ran away from home. This embarrassed her. She had to blame somebody. It was Captain Ferry's turn. Now, what I believe he's referring to here is Mrs. Landry, Al Landry's mother. But how do you stop a lie when it's repeated often enough and loud enough? Anyhow, after a few days, it became apparent that she was wrong, and Captain Ferry knew nothing about her son running away. Captain Ferry threatened to sue her for what she was saying. That was his mistake. The next thing I know, I'm dragged into it. I'm not surprised because I know what she has been saying about me for so long. Some cops picked me up and rousted me around a while. They gave me a paper to sign, and I signed it. I should not have, but I did. I was so scared, I would have signed anything just to get out of there. I was 16, going on 17. I did not know what I signed, so I was shook when I found out a few days later that I was supposed to be a state witness against Captain Ferry in criminal charges. Then I was in contact with Captain Ferry and arrangements to get papers from his lawyer withdrawing the charges. In a moment of courage, I signed these. Then I called the cops and told them what I did and why. For this, they charged Captain Ferry with intimidating witnesses. Another thing, they picked up some kid. First, they called him Dumas, whose name is McClendon. My father and I talked to them a few weeks ago. They claimed they knew nothing about the case. The cops were trying to make this kid be a witness against Ferry, too. This is how it went. This woman, like I said, has big political connections. When I signed these withdrawal, I was rousted around again. Then I got real scared. I had nowhere to turn. I was scared of this woman, of the cops, and whether Captain Ferry would sue me for false charges or what. So I did the only thing left and took off for the service. The service taught me my rights and what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of. When I came home a couple months ago, I knew my rights. With my father and my lawyer, I went to the DA and explained the whole situation. They had no other choice than to drop the charges. I want to make one thing clear. All these charges are false. It just did not happen. I am completely exonerating Captain Ferry. I went to your Captain Grenier in New Orleans, and I telephoned your Miami lawyer, William Bell. With each one, I tried to tell my story. I got the brush off. Why wouldn't they let me tell the story? Yada, yada, yada. There is another side to Captain Ferry that you should know. First, he is a loyal American and Christian. In Civil Air Patrol and other activities, he has done his best to help wandering kids. He helps them get on the straight road. He encourages education and religion. He is one of the few adults who do this. The rest just talk about their civic duties to the young and never do anything about it. Second, he is aviation-minded. He encourages kids to study aviation and to follow into the space age. He was talking about rockets a long time ago when his fellow pilots laughed at him for it. Some of your pilots today he trained. Third, he is a good pilot. I have been talking out at a New Orleans airport. I find he has the best reputation on the Gulf Coast and as an instrument pilot, and everyone agrees that they would want him before anybody else at the controls. Fourth, he is safety-minded. Everybody knows how he trained his own co-pilots and stewardesses in safety and emergency measures and on his own time. 5, he is company-minded because he's always running around giving public talks for Eastern and on his own time and money. 6, when everybody was too chicken to move, he got food, clothing, medicine, and housing for Cuban refugees, yet some loyal patriots on Eastern Airlines criticized it. 7, he never disgraced your company. He did not get fined and have his name in the paper for jeopardizing your flights. I read in the paper where 13 of your captains got fined for having the stewardesses in their laps during flight with passengers aboard, and they are still flying. Don't you think Captain Ferry should be too? So I hope that you will do the right thing and the American thing and put Captain Ferry back on flying duty. I would like to know what you are going to do. Yours truly, Eric Cruchette. So, now we have the alleged victim of this whole Eastern Airlines fiasco claiming that everything was crap and that David Ferry was framed. Yet when he went to the cops in New Orleans with this story, saying that none of it was true, they made more charges against Ferry for intimidated witness because they figured that Ferry and some other folks had went to have a little talk with Eric Cruchette and convinced him to renege everything that he had stated before. And we'll get to what he stated before. It's very interesting. Another interesting tidbit. We talked about Guy Bannister going to Miami on his behalf and testifying. I got a part of an article from Ramparts, January 1968. Ferry worked on and off for Bannister as an investigator, and the mutual affinity was such in 1962 when Eastern Airlines was in the middle of dismissing Ferry for publicity over alleged homosexual acts. Bannister appeared at a Miami hearing and delivered an impassioned plea on his behalf. When Bannister suddenly died, the ex-pilot, Ferry, evidently acquired part of his files. When he realized he was a prime suspect in Garrison's probe, Ferry systematically disposed of his papers and documents for the years 1962 and 1963. But in photocopying the bibliography of a cancer paper that he had written, at one time he had caged mice in his home on which he experimented with cancer implants, he inadvertently overlapped the bottom portion of notes recording the dispositions. Included is the notation, copies of Bannister's microfilm files to Atlanta right-wingers. The Bannister files were reputed to be the largest collection of anti-communist intelligence in Louisiana. In part were sold by his widow to the Sovereignty Commission, a sort of state House Un-American Activities Commission, where a Garrison investigator was able to examine them. Bannister's filing system was modeled after the FBI's and contained files on both friends and foes. The 10 and 23 classification dealt with Cuban matters. 23-5, for example, was labeled Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front, and 10-209 simply Cuban file. There was a main file, 23-14, labeled the Shaw file, but someone had completely stripped it before Garrison's man got there. Interesting. Now, we spoke a second ago about the whole Eric Cruchette and the intimidation. And here's allegedly what occurred with that. New Orleans Police Department Supplementary Report, August 5th, 1961. On Thursday morning, August 24th, 1961, investigating officers received a phone call from Mr. Al Landry, who stated the juvenile Michael Cruchette had come to his residence on the night of Wednesday, August 23rd, 1961, and told of being contacted by David Ferry. The boy told Mr. Landry that Ferry was trying to get him to drop the charges. Investigating officers immediately contacted Michael Cruchette at his employer's by phone. Cruchette stated that Ferry came to the store where he was employed on the 23rd, 61. According to Cruchette, Ferry was with another person who he introduced as a Cuban who had jumped in the recent invasion of Cuba. Ferry, as Cruchette stated, asked him to sign a paper stating that he had made the statement to the police out of anger for Captain Ferry. Cruchette said also that Ferry told him that he would have to sign the paper or be dealt with by some Cubans. Cruchette told investigating officers that he signed the paper shown him by Ferry because he was afraid. Cruchette said also that he told him his parents about Ferry's visit to the store after he knocked off from work, and later that night he went to see Mr. Al Landry about it. Cruchette stated that he asked Mr. Landry to notify investigating officers. On the 24th, investigating officers went to Puglia Supermarket, where Cruchette is employed, and a full typewritten statement who was taken from him relative to the visits made by Ferry. This statement will better explain the occurrence, which also describes the subject with Ferry and another who was sitting outside the store in Ferry's car. Cruchette thought that one of the unknown subjects was known by the name Andrew. Cruchette stated that Ferry stayed in the store from about 2:15 until 3 o'clock, and later, when he got off work, Ferry was waiting outside in his car. Blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. Now, this next is an interview or a statement from James Landry, age 16, residing at blah blah, relative to Captain David Ferry, residing at blah blah. Do you know Captain David Ferry? Yes, sir. How'd you get to meet him? Through my father, who works at Eastern Airlines, where Captain Ferry is a pilot. Were you a member of the Civil Air Patrol that Captain Ferry was in command of? Yes, sir. The Metairie Falcon Squad. Did you ever attend any parties at Captain Ferry's home on Atherton Drive? Yes, sir. What happened at those parties? Well, at one of those parties, we brought our dates and danced and had whiskey and beer to drink. All the rest of the parties were stag parties, meaning all male. All the parties, you went to Captain Ferry's home, were you allowed to drink whiskey and beer? Yes, sir. It really wasn't parties, it was just get-togethers after the meetings. Have you ever seen any obscene, loud, or dirty pictures at the home of Captain Ferry? Yes, sir. I saw some of these small comic books with people effing, and he had some photographs the captain said that were from Mexico that had a man and woman screwing. Did you ever see any boy drunk at Captain Ferry's home after a party there? I was high a couple times. Al Landry was high. He drank at most of the parties I went to. That month and day did these parties what month and day did these parties take place? Well, we had a party Christmas Eve and had whiskey and beer. Who was at this party? Al Landry was there. Donnie Richards was there for a little while. Leighton Martins was there. They didn't have too many. How did you get to see these pictures you mentioned before, the lewd ones? Well, the captain handed them to me and told me to look at them. Okay. So, continuing this little line of questioning, we move to the original statement made by Eric Cruchette, investigating Captain David Ferry. When did you first meet Captain Ferry? It was about 1 or 2 years ago after Halloween when I joined the Civil Air Patrol. Can you tell us anything about your knowledge of Captain Ferry? When I first joined the outfit, I found out that there were going to be a lot of drinking parties. So I tried to find out what the parties were like, and I found out when I went to my first party. There were whiskey and beer drinks at one of the parties held at one of the female cadets' house, and Captain Ferry was there. After the party, Captain Ferry left with 3 boys. Since then, I've gone to many parties where there was heavy drinking, and Captain Ferry, I have gone to about 10 or 15 of these parties. I did so much drinking at this time that I almost became an alcoholic. Most of the stag drinking parties were held at Captain Ferry's house when he lived at Airline Park Boulevard and some on Atherton Drive. One night, Captain Ferry rented the Walnut Room at the New Orleans airport for a Mardi Gras party for boys and girls. They had plenty of beer at the party, and there were about 30 kids there that night. That was Mardi Gras of 1960, and about 3 or 4 of us who really got drunk. 2 weeks after the Mardi Gras, I went to his house on Airline Park Boulevard, and we went out riding and had a few drinks. Captain Ferry bought the drinks, and we were drinking while we were driving. We went to the New Orleans airport, and he bought me 6 more beers. We went to Captain Ferry's house at Airline Park at 6 a.m., and we went to bed together. Captain Ferry showed me a book with just writing in it, and it was a sexy story. And he told me that he was going to jerk off. Captain Ferry asked me if I was going to jerk off as well. Captain Ferry climbed on top of me and put his penis on top of my leg. He had a discharge on me, and then we went to sleep. A couple of weeks later, I went over to his house again, and Captain Ferry gave me the same book and let me read it. He jerked me off, and he jerked himself off at about the same time, and when I had my discharge, he was looking at it. About 1 month later, Captain Ferry, Leighton Martins, and myself were going home from drill, and we had just taken Carl Costa home. We were getting ready to take Leighton home, and Ferry asked Leighton if he wanted to spend the night at his house, and Leighton said, all right. While in the car, we got into discussion of jerking off, and Leighton asked Captain Ferry and I if we ever jerked off and discharged enough to come out for enough to hit you in the eye. I noticed when I was in Captain Ferry's house that there were spots all over the wall and all over his dresser, and it looked like discharge spots. The 3 of us drove to Captain Ferry's house, and Leighton also slept in the living room, and me and Captain Ferry went to Captain Ferry's bedroom. Captain Ferry jerked me off, and then he jerked himself off again. After that, I went to sleep, and the next morning when I woke up, Captain Ferry had his well, let's just leave that there. Penis, let's go into it. Penis in my rectum. I didn't let him know I was awake, and I turned over and it came out. When I left him know that I woke up, we dressed and went out to New Orleans airport, worked on the plane, and cleaned up the building. Captain Ferry told us a few days or weeks later that he was going to move to Atherton Drive, and he asked me to help him move. Al Landry, one of the other boys in the Civil Air Patrol, helped us move Captain Ferry. On the day we moved him, Captain Ferry got some whiskey, and we went back to the apartment, and Captain Ferry showed us some sex books. It was one of those you can buy at the newsstand. Captain Ferry told us that we had to break in the new house by everybody jerking off. We finished our drinks, and us to Al Landry home. As we were riding home, Captain Ferry or Al asked why we didn't jerk off tonight and break in the house. It was about 12:30 a.m. and Captain Ferry said that it was too late. We took Al home, and then he took me home, and I was having a few arguments with my father, and Captain Ferry tried to straighten out the trouble. After he moved into his house on Atherton Drive, I spent the night over at his house, and we went to bed together, and he, guess what, jerked him off and blew me. He put his mouth on my penis and came up and started kissing my mouth, and he went back down again. I left my discharge in his mouth. Okay, you get the idea, folks. You get the idea. I can't read any more of this. It's just too disgusting. Not just the fact that, it's a homosexual act, because, whatever floats your boat. This is child predator behavior. That's what I'm disgusted about. That he's doing this to these teenage boys and, gets away with it. Oh, my goodness. My goodness, my goodness, my goodness. So that was from Eric Cruchette. James Landry. His statement. Much of the same. Who did you sleep with when you stayed at Captain Ferry's home? Captain Ferry. Did you ever have any sexual relations with the captain while you were sleeping with him? Yes, sir. I was sleeping with the captain, and I woke up, and he was jerking me off. While he was jerking me off, he jerked himself off. Do you remember what day this happened? I can't remember the date, but he jerked me off about 3 times. Do you know any of the other boys that the captain had sex relations with? No, sir. Is there anything else that you haven't told me pertaining to the activities at Captain Ferry's home? No, sir, that's all. Is the above statement true to the best of your knowledge, and did you give this statement freely of your own will without threats or promises? Yes, sir. Signed by James Landry, 11:05 a.m. So it wasn't just Michael Cruchette and James Landry and Leighton Martins and this, that, and the other. I mean, it's just... Okay. I mean... what else is there to say? The dude was a sexual predator. He had proclivities. Mostly boys, but I'm sure there were some girls involved, women involved, other men involved, and this is the real David Ferry, people. Not the Hollywood version that you've seen in the movie JFK. Not the romanticized version of the good old guy, Dr. David Ferry by Judith Baker. This is the real monster, David W. Ferry. Predator to teenage boys. So now that we have a better picture of the real David Ferry, what he was really like in his private life, what he enjoyed, what his passions were, very anti-Castro, pro Cuban exiles, hated Kennedy for what happened at the Bay of Pigs, heard by various witnesses such as Perry Russo, plotting the death of President Kennedy at his home. Being in close proximity to a young Lee Harvey Oswald. There's a story of a man in military uniform visiting Marguerite Oswald and trying to convince her to sign the papers to let her son enter the military at a younger age. Let him drop out of school and go into the military. And it's been said that this person was possibly David Ferry. It's a big question that's out there. And there's a lot of people that said that these two knew each other, and he denied it. So okay, just for instance, if you're implicated in the murder of President Kennedy, you happen to have had the alleged murderer of President Kennedy in your Civil Air Patrol group, you knew him, why wouldn't you just say, yeah, he was in my Civil Air Patrol group, but he was a young, shy kid, never said much. He wasn't in very long, and then he got out. And that's all I know about it. Yet he denied even knowing him, or him denied him being in the Civil Air Patrol, which is a blatant lie, and proved years later, as we now have the picture to prove it. So, the question remains, we know what kind of a person David Ferrie really was, but was he involved in the Kennedy assassination? What really happened? From A Farewell to Justice by Joan Mellon. Gerald Patrick Hemming and Howard K. Davis went to Louisiana in search of training camp sites. Herb also flew reconnaissance planes for the CIA into Cuba. His own flights, Dave told Wagner, were the most patriotic thing I've ever done. Now Dave wanted $400 to rent a plane to fly to Dallas, a trip Wagner later concluded was to take care of prearrangements for the assassination. He would be coming right back the same day. That Dave flew to Dallas that week is also confirmed by Alan Campbell, a young Bannister operative who was Ferrie's next-door neighbor at the airport. Campbell knew Ferrie with his red Brillo pad glued to his head and his circus, in quotes, the tough young kids who he surrounded himself with. Yes, Campbell says, Dave flew to Dallas that week. And I'm talking about the week before the assassination. Interesting. Very interesting. So as we move just a little forward in Joan Mellon's book. Okay, I read you the interview earlier with Lou Ivon. The day before, he was taken into protective custody by Garrison's office. The following afternoon, just as Ivon was sitting down to Sunday dinner, his telephone rang. It was David Ferrie. My life is being threatened. They're going to kill me, he pleaded for protection. Dave, hold still. I'll be right over. Ivan drove first to Jim Garrison's house. Check him in at the Fontainebleau, Garrison said. By 4 o'clock, Ferrie had checked in under a false name. Now he sat down and talked to Lou Ivon. He admitted that he had worked for the CIA. How do you think I got the man out of Guatemala, he said, referring to his rescue of Carlos Marcello. Ain't no ordinary person could do that. Both he and Clay Shaw, whom he had known for a long time, had been involved with the CIA. Of course, Shaw was Bertrand, and Shaw hated John F. Kennedy, Ferrie said. Yes, Oswald had been at Guy Bannister's office. Oswald had also visited the training camps across the lake. Ferrie talked freely about his own part in the burglary of the CIA-affiliated Schlumberger ammunition dump in Huma. His sponsor, Ferrie said, was Robert Kennedy, who had given him and Leighton Martin's letters of marque. He had received checks from the White House through a CIA account. You're on the right track, Ferrie told Ivon, but you won't get anywhere because of the government. Then he added, you guys don't know what you're dealing with. You all can't handle this. In his report, Ivon wrote that Ferrie had been the babysitter for Lee Harvey Oswald, a role assigned to him by the CIA. Clay Shaw had served as a conduit of information from Washington. At 4 in the morning, Lou Ivon finally went home, leaving Lynn Loisel to keep an eye on Dave. When Lynn went out for cigarettes, Ferrie fled the hotel. So there would be no leak. Ivon decided not to have his report typed by an office secretary, but to give Jim Garrison his handwritten notes directly. The next morning, Orestes Pena spotted Ferrie walking on Decatur Street. He must find Sergio Arcacha Smith and Wilfredo Mas, Ferrie told Pena. Mas was with both the FBI and CIA. His brother in Miami belonged to the DRE. Pena suggested that Ferrie ask DRE member Carlos Brignier. Then Pena telephoned Garrison's office and told investigator Frank Maloche that he had just seen Ferrie. Garrison is trying to frame me because he wants the publicity to run for a higher office, Ferry told Bernier. Assuming that Bernier would know, Ferry asked him for the date when the conspiracy started. He needs help in finding Arkasha. All judges should be hanged, Ferry remarks. Bernier's back goes up. In Cuba, his father had been a judge. You should go to a psychiatrist, Ferry finally tells Bernier, because anyone who believes in a communist conspiracy to kill Kennedy needs to go to a psychiatrist. David Ferry has renewed his acquaintance with the truth. The next day, Ferry sits in the New Orleans Public Library perusing the Warren Commission volumes. He sells his airplane. He is being harassed because he helped Carlos Marcello, he says. He has figured out that Jimmy Johnson had been spying on him, but does nothing about it. He meets up with his old friend, now former policeman Sandy Krasnoff, who knows he is close to Shaw. I am going to kill myself, Ferry says. I'm fed up with life, and he plans to use poison. In the early morning hours of Wednesday, February 22nd, Ferry was interviewed at his apartment by George Lardner, which I read to you earlier. He said that he did not remember having met Lee Harvey Oswald since they were in different units of the CAP. He was hunting geese the weekend of the assassination, and the district attorney, and he knows he's got a tiger by the tail. And Lardner departed at 4 a.m. By the next day, he was dead. So, there you have it, folks. Apparently, straight from the horse's mouth, he was involved. Will we ever know the truth? The key to solving this crime is in New Orleans and what happened the summer of 1963, I believe. I believe there were some very influential, wealthy, impassioned people who decided that President Kennedy would be better off dead than alive. They viewed that he was soft on communism, that he would never stand up for America against the growing threat of Cuba and Russia and the communists. And therefore, a plot was hatched in New Orleans where we have all these guys, Bannister, former FBI, you have CIA, you got all these people converging in one city with all of this information at their disposal, and also, luckily, a hapless patsy who just happened to have the right background to be duped and used by these people to get away with their assassination plot. At least in my opinion. But anyway, folks, I'm sorry for the long length, and I apologize for the foul language used by David Ferry and the various descriptions of what allegedly took place in David Ferry's life. But sometimes, folks, the truth is ugly. And to really understand and know a person, you need to know all of the dirty details. And now you have them. And it's up to you to make up your own mind whether or not David Ferry played a part in the assassination plot. Anyway, that's it for me. That's it for me guest hosting on the Midnight Rider News Show this year. We've had a great year. The show's done great. For all of my past shows and visits on this show and all of the great shows that ST has in the archives, head over to MidnightRiderNews.com for the archives. You can listen to all the shows there for free. To get in touch with ST and the rest of the gang at Midnight Rider, send an email to midnightridernews@gmail.com for show suggestions, comments, guest suggestions, anything of that nature. As for me, hopefully I'll be back next year if ST has me. Let him know if you want to hear more of me in the new year. I'd be more than happy to come back and do it. Anyway, this is Rob Clark, the Lone Gunman, signing off as the guest host for this edition of the Midnight Rider News Show. Thank you so much for having me. All the best, everyone. Till next time.
You can contact St. Patrick by email at midnightridernews@gmail.com. Join us on Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show. Follow St. Patrick on Twitter at MWN_St. Patrick. We are LinkedIn at S.T.Patrick. And don't forget to follow Midnight Rider News on your YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and many of your favorite podcast providers. This has been a production of MidnightRiderNews.com and St. Patrick. Copyright 2018. All rights reserved. We'll see you next time, and be good to the night.